WGBH-TV, Boston.
Major funding for NOVA is provided by this station and by other public television stations. Additional funding is provided by grants from Exxon Corporation and the National Science Foundation.
A group of nomads begins the day's search for pasture. Over thousands of years, they have learned just where to find it in all seasons. But in the last half-century, the good pasture has become less plentiful. The fringes of the desert seem to be less habitable. The cause of this change is not climate, but man. On the edge of the Sahara in western Sudan is a village called Al-Gitarat. 10 years ago, the villagers noticed that the surrounding natural greenery was disappearing. The fields were becoming less productive. Their cattle couldn't find enough forage, so they exchanged them for goats. The goats ate what vegetation was left, and then the wind blew the soil away. When their means of existence was gone, the people left. Only 7 remained. Musa Jumbra claims to be 100. He was born in Al-Gitarat and refuses to leave. Although his children have moved south, he is afraid that he would fare no better in another place.
محاصيل وبهايم كل شيء عامر شديد والحله كانت دي وين؟ هذه واحده ديك انتهت ديك انتهت ودي في اللعمي منك شجره اللعمي ذاك سواتنا بتشوفوا دي الحله واحده والحله واحده في شقديله في شجرات باغات وواحده في ديك الظهيريه وخلاص كلهم فزوا وانت لكن المقاعدكم شنو؟ هاي قاعد عندنا معاد ونحلق ونطيب يجينا شويه نزل شويه
Hamid Zaroug still has a widowed daughter to look after him. He is blind and very stubborn.
انتوا المقاعدكم شنو؟ ما تمرقوا تمشوا مش حمرة الوز؟
حمرة الوز؟ من كوسنا الخراب خلى خير لنا خلى بقرش العود دولة الحمرة فيها ما فيها شيء.
بتزرعوا انتوا؟ ما بتزرعوا؟ تاكلوا من وين؟
الزراعة ديك كدها غرب.
زراعتكم انتوا ذات نفسها؟ بتزرعوا برا من هنا يعني؟
نزرع برا زراعتنا هناك برا.
لكن حاسة الحالة دي كويسة يعني مرتاحين لها؟ حالتكم دي؟
والله قال لقينا المشروع مرتاحين لكن ما لقينا ولا مرتاحين.
With no plant cover to hold the ground moisture, the wells succumbed to drought. Now they are completely dry. Every other day, Hamid's daughter travels 10 miles to buy water. She hopes to convince her father that when they have gathered in their meager sorghum crop, they too should move on. Perhaps to Khartoum, the capital, where they have relatives. A third of the Earth's surface consists of desert or semi-desert. 1 person in 6 lives here. Yet they are turning these marginal lands into wasteland. In the last 17 years, in the Sudan, the Sahara has been pulled southward 50 miles. Mariotis, an eroded waste west of Alexandria. 2,000 years ago, it was famous throughout the Roman Empire for its superb wines. Throughout history, man's settlements have regularly degraded the land. It is the increased rate which is alarming today. In the past, there was always room to move on. But today we are reaching the limits of expansion. It's said that by the end of the century, food needs will have increased by a third, but we will have lost a third of the arable land. Traditional lifestyles in the drylands are attuned to the conditions there. For thousands of years, the nomad has lived in regions too dry to support agriculture. The Kababish in the western Sudan breed a few goats and sheep, sometimes cattle, but mainly camels. Their mobility is the key to their success because they can move easily to widely spaced patches of good pasture. Dr. William Payne.
If you really think about how the nomad utilizes the land, he's really acting like a large rancher who rotates his cattle around his ranch, and this is the kind of best that modern science suggests for the large rancher to do. Only the nomad is rotating his animals over a very, very large area.
They are careful not to overpopulate the range, selling off surplus animals if necessary. The Kababish trade across the frontiers of the Sudan, Egypt, and Libya. A full-grown camel will sell for about $500, and a rich Kababish may have a herd of 200 or more. So although the lifestyle is simple, a family could have assets of over $100,000. Dr. Ali Daraj.
This cannot be evaluated in terms of money. When they possess this amount of camel, he is satisfied. He feels himself he's satisfied. He is a dignified man within his tribe. For example, he can give few of his camel to another rich Kababish so as to marry a beautiful girl among the tribe.
The Kababish pitch their tents for the season in the area of their tribal grazing lands. A patch of barley may be tended by the women, who remain in the camp with the children, the old and the less able. The men move with the herds, sometimes penetrating into the heart of the desert. Because here, when it does rain, a remarkable phenomenon occurs. A sudden blossoming of flowers and rich leguminous plants that have sometimes lain dormant for years, waiting for rain. This is the Jizu.
Now this occurs almost 600, 700, 800 miles away from the Kababish lands. But they send out their scouts. If they know there is a Jizu coming, then they move up into this area, which is totally waterless. There is no water of any kind at all. And so they have to live on camel's milk. The men live on camel's milk, the dogs live on camel's milk. Even if they take some sheep, the sheep live on camel's milk.
But really, they enjoy it, and they are very content about it. They don't want this type of life to finish. They want it to continue.
A difficult life, but it has allowed the nomad to maintain a precarious ecological balance by matching his movements to the seasons and the plant life. His animals have forage throughout the year, and the pasture can renew itself.
حيوانات كثير خلاص لأنه نحن بناكل دائما لحم من بجان وبنشرب لبن كثير ومستريحين في مكان واحد. لكن موية دي ما بنحتاج موية أبدا.
South of the Kababish, where rainfall is more dependable, lives the dryland farmer. He cultivates sorghum and millet, and also harvests gum from gum arabic trees which grow naturally. Ahmed Taiba is a gum Arabic farmer.
A farmer is allocated a piece of land which he divides into 3 plots. He fells one of these plots to use for sowing his crops like millet, dhurra, and sesame.
These he plants in one plot. They are his subsistence crops. They are drought resistant, growing well despite the scant rain. But they exhaust the soil easily, so he cannot plant more than 1 crop a year.
The remaining area is used for gum collection.
The resin of the gum Arabic tree is used in a variety of manufacturing processes, especially in candy making. For Ahmed Taiba, his tree is his cash crop. Merchants who buy his gum sell him medicine, cloth, and household goods. The trees take about 5 years to start producing. They grow naturally from wind-borne seeds landing in the fallow plots. Because they are nitrogen-fixing, they renew the soil as they grow. Since 2 plots always lie fallow, the soil has about 15 years to recuperate. With this careful rotation, the gum Arabic farmer, like the nomad, maintains the productivity of his marginal land. Dr. Mohammed Kassas.
People lived in the deserts, in Egypt and all over the world, for thousands of years, in what one may call a level of harmony with the environment. Let me quote the example, for instance, of the people who lived in the coastal areas of Egypt, the land extending from Alexandria westward to the Libyan border.
Along the coast, once nomadic Bedouins have settled. Ragab Abdullah is the head of his family since his father is dead. He is responsible for providing for his mother and sisters. This he does by farming the land and gathering from the sea. His small farm runs from the coast back into the desert. During the migration season, he catches quail that come to rest on the dunes after a long flight over the Mediterranean. What the family doesn't eat will be sold in Alexandria. Behind the dunes on the lower ground, he grows wheat and barley with runoff from the winter rains. This provides the family with bread. On the higher ground, he cultivates fig and olive trees. This is his cash crop, as he sells the fruits to merchants who will resell them in the Alexandria market. On the rocky limestone ridges beyond, where the soil can support only a few bushes, he raises some goats and sheep.
If he would like to exploit this land, overdo it, then the system may fail to provide. But if he would maintain this sort of easygoing, low level of productivity, he can maintain this forever.
Even in the heart of the desert, where rain is an extraordinary event, cultivation is possible. Like other oases, the Funnel Oasis in Algeria gets its water from underground aquifers, which transport it from wetter regions hundreds of miles away. Where the water-bearing rock layer is close to the surface, springs occur, or wells can be dug. These provide irrigation water for the oasis gardens. Cultivation in an oasis is governed by water rights. The water belongs to the family who made it available by constructing the well and channels. They can sell measured amounts. The right to sell and the right to purchase a specific amount are passed down from generation to generation. The quantity of water owned determines how much land a man can cultivate. But the entire oasis is closely watched so that the water demands do not exceed the recharge rate of the underground supply. The sandy soil is fertile, but it is also easily carried by the wind. A tremendous amount of manpower is needed just to keep the surrounding sand out of the cultivated area. Every 2 or 3 months, these giant sand pits must be cleared. It is backbreaking labor. A daily vigil must be kept on the windbreaks, which hold back the sand. These are made from dried palm fronds. The main product of the oasis is dates. Once established, the date palm draws up its own water from the shallow water table. Dates are an important part of the local diet. Even their mashed pits are used to feed camels on a long journey. They are also the major trade item. So, provided the people don't make too great a demand on the water, they can maintain their palmery indefinitely. In the middle of the Sahara, 200 miles west of the funnel oasis, the Mazab have created an oasis. Their magnificent gardens have all been established around hand-dug wells. They often had to dig to a depth of 300 feet before hitting groundwater level. The Mazab undertook this difficult task in the 11th century. Religious persecution forced them to flee from North Africa to the heart of the desert. Here, too, dates are the main crop. But at the foot of the trees, and in between the rows of palms, the Mazab grow a variety of vegetables and fruits. These gardens represent more than just the manpower it takes to maintain them. An influx of money makes it possible to improve them constantly, and that money comes from trade. The Mazab have always been superb merchants. Their 5 cities are resting places and trading centers for the trans-Saharan caravans. Since the very beginning, some Mazabite men have always gone off to trade for a few years, returning with items or ideas for enriching the oasis. Their reputation as sharp traders was equal to their reputation for religious fanaticism. An heretic sect of Islam, the Ibadite Mazab are governed by strict laws regulating every facet of life. This is what led them to the desert in the first place, and this is what dictated the return of the merchants over the centuries. But today, young men going abroad are not returning to the highly disciplined life at home, and the manpower needed to keep up the gardens is disappearing. The 5 cities of the Mazab in the middle of the Sahara are losing their more educated and adventuresome sons to the irresistible opportunities of the modern metropolis. The hope of making money and improving their lives with less physical effort is not always fulfilled. Those who fail may find themselves stranded. In each of the traditional desert edge societies, the effects of the 20th century are disruptive. The gum Arabic farmers finding that 3 plots of land is now a luxury, and rotating 2 plots doesn't work so well. The fallow period is reduced from 15 to 7 years, not enough time for his trees to establish themselves, or the soil to build up its nutrients.
Due to the growth of population around the villages and water points, there has been less land for each farmer to cultivate. As a consequence, he cannot allow long enough fallow period for the gum trees to come up. And as you see around this area, which was originally a reasonable cultivable area, has now become almost desert.
The farmer is overstressing the land for another reason. At the turn of the century, in order to earn enough money to buy a roll of cloth, he needed to sell 20 baskets of gum Arabic. Today, that same roll of cloth costs 100. Gum Arabic, like other raw materials, has maintained a relatively low price on the international market, and it competes with synthetics. Manufactured items like housewares and cloth have increased sharply, so a man turns to the moneylender, or if lucky, becomes one himself.
اي الشيء ده اسمه الشيء ممكن بقرة نشيلك له ممكن غنمان نشيلك له معلوم
بعدين عندك بهايم حاجه
ما في بهايم ذات خلاص حصدناها
وانت عندك بقر
بقر شنو البقر 3 بقر 4 بقر يعني انا احسن ذول عندي لي 4 بقرات تقريبا
وبعدين هتعملوا شنو انتوا افرض حلتهم دي هسه تستمر بالشكل ده
نعمل شنو؟ اكثر حاجه هنهاجر عليكم الى المدن ان شاء الله نكبسكم ان شاء الله بعد عام 80 هنجي كابسينكم وهذا الدنيا بالصوره دي
زمان كانت عندكم غابه هنا في بالعياره دي انقرضت ولا لسه؟
لا دي ما محجوزه
حجزوها؟
محجوزه محجوزه دي بس اللي كويسه المحجوزه هي
وبعدين لما كان في جماعه اشتكوا على انه الغابه دي كانوا يستفيدوا منها ومش عارف شنو شكوتهم حصل لها
ديل بس بيقول خلاص فيهم ذات قبضوهم فيهم قضيتهم بعد 4 سنين فيهم قضيتهم بس بيقوا بحاحوا معانا وكشف الدنيا بقى صحراء من واحد من قريه تشوف 8 قريه جنبه
انتوا الحكايه دي شعرين بها يعني؟
شعروا بها هم ذاتهم شعروا بها
الناس ذاتهم لك طيب اذا كان بيشعروا بها ليه قاعدين يقطعوا؟
لا ما الناس ما انا كلمتك الناس 90% كادحين 90% او 95% ال 5% ديل اذا فك خشمهم قالوا للكادح اللي بيقوموا فرار وبقبر وبدون سلطه وبدون علامه تقول له انت ما تكبر يعتبرك حاربته في معيشته ويوم ما حيخلي لك البلد يخليك براك
تقصد انه يعني مضطرين يحرقوا
مضطرين يحرقوا لانه اذا اللي يجيب المويه ما عارف هسه صفيح ب4 قروش اللي يركب ولا تجيبه اذا ما جاب شوال فحم ولا حمار حطب فات به يجيبه صفيحه المويه ما
Making charcoal and dealing in firewood is a traditional livelihood in the marginal lands. Firewood for heat and charcoal for cooking have always been the major source of fuel, although kerosene is sometimes used. Zaid Fayoum had spent all his adult life as a soldier. 3 years ago, he decided to return to his Sudanese village and become a farmer like his father. But there was not enough land to support him and his family, so he became a charcoal burner. He is evasive about how he gets his wood. In the past, wood was collected from one's own or common land. Today, much of the firewood is poached, and woods are cleared much faster than they're being replaced. Zaid Fayoum brings his wares to the nearby market town of Barra. Whether it is firewood or charcoal, he has no difficulty selling it. A few years ago, the people of Barra just had to take a 5-minute walk outside town to find firewood. Now, the nearest usable trees are an hour away. The decimation of the forest is not simply because there are more people. The demand for charcoal has increased because the cost of kerosene, the one other fuel used for cooking, has gone up dramatically with the rise in oil prices. A bottle costing 10 cents in 1972 now costs 40 cents, a 400% increase. And the oil producers themselves demand charcoal. But there are no trees in Arabia, so charcoal is imported from East Africa. And the short-term gains produce long-term devastation. Ethiopia. In the highlands, land denuded of trees soon erodes down the hillside. Unimpeded by vegetation, torrential floods carve deep gullies into agricultural soil, turning farms into wastelands. Canyons form. Village goats are an important part of the process. As vegetation becomes sparse, they eat the leaves off the remaining trees and bushes, killing them off. Soon there are bare patches of ground, and the soil washes away, taking with it the livelihood of the people. The one person who seemed to control his own life was the nomad. He neither paid taxes nor wanted much in return.
In spite of the fact they are rich, as we have said before, but really their contribution to the national economy is very little. And that mainly because they consume very little. They buy only essential commodities, such as oil for cooking, maybe okra, and maybe some dates, just a few things and essential things for living purposes.
Yet the nomad finds himself the citizen of a state whose boundaries take no account of his tribal grazing and watering arrangements, and he has become the victim of government's good intentions. Because improved veterinary services and the drilling of deep wells has often resulted in an increase in livestock beyond the land's carrying capacity. Governments wanted that increase, but didn't realize the dangers involved until the disastrous 5-year Sahelian drought.
When people in the Sahel maintained a subsistence type of life, they had maintained herds of animals, enough for them to live, to provide them with their own milk and the like. They maintained a living which was sustained for thousands of years. But when the governments of many of these countries began the sort of national development, and the animal life became almost the only thing that they can sell to the outside and bring foreign currency, then there was pressure on these people to intensify their land use, to increase their herds, because they became a part of the whole international market.
Increasing their herds meant that nomads had to have access to more water. Their traditional shallow wells would soon dry up if they tried to draw off too much water. And the manpower needed to draw the water for so many more animals would increase. So in the Sudan, for example, the government agreed to dig deep wells and install motorized pumps. It also constructed large reservoirs for water storage.
As an example is Mazroub. Water had been increased. In the past there was one reservoir. So now the number of reservoirs provided by the government with a good intention to solve problem of water supply is 3. So it drew more population, more settler to these areas and start to increase the livestock population, and this is a major source of natural resource destruction.
The additional cattle pulverized the soil around the wells until it could no longer support vegetation. Ever-widening areas of aridity linked up, making whole areas bare and sterile. With plentiful water, nomads took the opportunity to expand their herds, making the process of desertification inevitable.
First of all, you have a situation where the range itself is open to everybody. It's common land. But the animals that are grazing the range are owned by individuals. So obviously, the individual tries to get as much of the grazing available for himself. So there's a kind of competition, as you might say. But nevertheless, they understand that they are spoiling each other's efforts by doing this. But there's something much more fundamental at stake here. And that is, these people don't have social security. Their only security is their animals. If you get 7 or 10 years drought and they all die out, they have nothing.
In the Sahelian drought, the cattle died not of thirst, but of starvation. Pasture lands were grazed and trampled beyond regeneration. 2 million nomads lost half their livestock, in some places more than 90%. With their means of subsistence gone, nearly 250,000 people starved to death. The Drylands people are not always helpless victims of forces beyond their control. The coastal Bedouin of Borg El Arab is under no pressure from others. Despite opportunity, he is making no effort to improve his land. Windmills installed by the government stand immobile and rusting. He is motivated by a different opportunity, drawing him away from tradition. Although Ragab Abdullah lives in Egypt, Libya has offered him dual citizenship, since the government there has an interest in Egypt's western desert. So he took advantage of this, and like others, traveled to Libya with a few sheep and perhaps some gold and a little hashish, which certainly fetches a good price there.
قلت نمشي الليبي دي العالم تمشي الليبي نمشي الليبي زي العالم دي يجيبوا لنا منها قرشين ولا بتاع.
While he was gone, his family looked after the land. For 2 months, they managed while he worked in a factory there, hoping to earn more in that short time than he could make in a year on his small farm. But if his hopes were realized, it's not something to discuss, especially with strangers.
برضه الأجر اللي بتاخده هناك بيكفي بيكفي
تاخذ 25 جنيه لو أكلك ولا شربك من هذا
25 جنيه ليبي
غير ب 50 مصري
يعني برضه لا مش بالصورة اللي الواحد كان فاهمها، يعني الواحد كان تقال إن الشهرين دول في ليبيا هجي لك ب 1000 جنيه لك بتاع حاجة يعني
أيوه حاجة تروج شوية
لكن 100 جنيه ولا 80 جنيه يعني
The easy money also gave him second thoughts about his land.
الأرض اللي كان عندكم أرض هنا في البحر على البحر دي عملت فيها إيه؟
دي
بس قاعدة؟
قاعدة
مش كنت مش عارف بعتها لمين ولا إيه؟
باعها والدي الوحدة 6
والله؟
The price she offered seemed insane, so he sold his land for far more than he could earn from it in years. And all along the coast, tourism has taken over. Good agricultural land is giving way to holiday homes. No country is more conscious of population pressure than Egypt. 99% of its people live along the Nile on just 4% of its land. The rest is desert. That is why the Egyptians have invested so heavily in development projects. With the aid and advice of the Russians, they built the Aswan High Dam to provide electricity for industrialization. They also intended to regulate the flow of the Nile, eliminating the annual flooding. A constant, predictable flow would make widespread irrigation projects possible. The Nubaria Canal brings the waters of the Nile to an area that was formerly desert. A series of irrigation ditches channels the water to newly opened fields. Like their Sudanese neighbors, the Egyptian government thought that simply bringing water to the desert would increase the land's productivity. With plenty of land to be cultivated, the population could then expand beyond the Nile Valley. Egypt would be on its way to breaking the poverty cycle and becoming self-sufficient.
This is not a straightforward thing because the system has an ability, has a certain capacity to take these extra inputs of water, these extra inputs of chemical compounds that you put in the soil. This is not an open-ended system that you can pour into it whatever you want and expect it to respond by producing more.
Today in Nubaria, hundreds of acres of land which at first gave good results are now abandoned.
The soil cannot take too much water. And if you put too much water, then it would remain in the soil. It would block all the little channels and capillaries through which water would drain, and you would begin to have the problems of waterlogging. This is loss of productive soil under the pressure of, I would say, ill-advised human management. By giving too much water or trying to intensify the agriculture in areas where the ecological situation cannot take all this beating.
Another unforeseen problem in Nubaria was the accumulation of salt. Dr. Joel Schechter, director of the Institute for Desert Research in Israel.
There is a direct relationship between waterlogging and salinity. Usually, when we irrigate a surface, the water trickles down to some barrier where it cannot go any further. If now we don't have drainage and cannot get rid of this water, then the water begins to rise little by little until it even reaches the surface. As it evaporates, more water is brought up to the top, and before we know it, we do have a layer of salt in the soil. If we have too much sodium in our soil, this causes deterioration of the physical structure of the soil so that it does not hold water well, that it does not release nutrients well, and that the plant finds great difficulty finding a good physical base for the many physiological activities of the plant.
Zakaria Ahmed used to live in the village of Abu Humus in the Nile Valley, but he owned only 1 fadan of land, about 1 acre. When the government offered him 3 fadan of land in West Nubaria and a house on easy terms, he couldn't refuse. After all, how could he divide his 1 fadan among his many children? So with high hopes, he moved to Nubaria.
بالنسبة للأرض بتاعت أبو حمص بتجيب أكتر من الأرض اللي إحنا حاليا موطنين فيها دلوقتي. بس هي أرض كويسة. من ناحية الأرض دوكها كويسة بنزرع فيها من زمان، أما الأرض النهاردة ديت مستجدية، يعني أرض حاليا اللي إحنا قاعدين فيها بتاعت منطقة النهضة اللي هي الحكومة مسلمها لنا، لسه أرض ما تنتجش يعني المناسبة اللي هي بتاعت أبو حمص. المناسبة بتاعت أبو حمص بتنتج كتير. يعني الفدان النهارده بتاع ابو حمص بيه 4 فدادين هنا في منطقه النهر.
Not only in Nubaria, but along the Nile itself, the Aswan scheme caused trouble. The banks began to erode when the current was altered. Land that was not eaten away no longer received the benefit of leaching and silt deposits once the annual flooding stopped. Loss of the silt load in the river also affected the coastline. beach areas, built up over millennia by silt deposits, were reclaimed by the ocean currents. Even the rich offshore fishery was destroyed when important nutrients were no longer supplied by silt from the river.
We must brainwash ourselves against Green Revolution concepts. Green Revolution is the intensive type of agriculture. This is applicable, this is successful in certain situations. In the 1948, we were told that people in Israel would have aeroplanes loaded with seeds, and this would scatter the seeds, and the whole desert would bloom. I think people in Israel later on became much wiser as they have established the research station in Beersheba to study the history of land use in this desert of Negev.
Archaeologists have always been fascinated by the extensive ruins left by ancient civilizations, which apparently thrived in Israel's barren Negev. Rainfall here is erratic and sparse. How did these civilizations manage? This was the question researchers at Israel's Institute for Desert Research asked themselves. Dr. Michael Evan-Ari.
In the past, the Negev was quite densely populated. We estimate, it's not more than an estimate, that in the Negev highlands there were about 70,000 to 100,000 people living at the different periods.
This is the Nabatean city of Avdat. It flourished from the 3rd century BC until the Arab invasion in the 7th century AD. Like the Mazab, its main source of income was from caravans, which carried spices and salt from the east to the Mediterranean. The city supplied itself with water from the runoff of the infrequent rains. By constructing ducts all along the buildings and pavements, the Nabateans channeled every drop of water into cisterns. Located throughout the city and in every public building were large municipal cisterns. Each homeowner made sure that runoff from his roof and porches was not lost. He collected it and channeled it into his own private cistern. Every house had its own reservoir, holding about a year's supply. In the chalky hillside surrounding the city, huge storage cisterns were carved. The slopes were divided into catchment areas, and channels fed the runoff into the storage. As the water ran down, debris was stopped by a few rocks positioned before the opening. With such large catchment areas, even a small flood would fill a cistern. The hillside reservoirs served the agricultural communities and their flocks with drinking water. The food supply for the cities and caravans was grown on farms located in wadis, or dry gullies between the hills. Channels from the slopes directed floods of runoff from unabsorbed rain into the terraces. A catchment area of 30 acres of slopes was needed to supply enough water to cultivate a 1-acre farm. The water ran from terrace to terrace. Slightly raised terrace walls trapped enough water to soak the fields. A good flood would wet all the fields.
The idea of rebuilding one of these farms came to us one day when, after many years of research in the field and surveying these ancient farms in order to find out how they worked, we at lunch sat round our lunch, and all of a sudden my wife said, "Why don't you test your theories in practice and rebuild one farm?"
There were several candidates whose terraces and channels were in good shape. Dr. Evan-Ari picked one with the remains of a farmhouse just below the city of Avdat. When it rains, the ancient channels dividing the nearby slope direct the runoff to different fields. As the water comes in, it is measured by a flood meter and channeled into a terrace. A silting basin in the channel picks up the heavier sediment. As in ancient times, the flow is shut off by a sluice when a specific field has been saturated. The diverted water continues on to the next terrace. Because this farm is experimental, an underground pipe distributes the water in equal amounts into plots whose yields will be measured. Each terrace has a spillway leading to the terrace below. The ancients provided for surplus water to flow back into the wadi, so that a heavy flood would not ruin their farms. Watered only by the runoff system, the farm has produced good yields of almonds, apricots, peaches, pistachios, and various vegetables and grains.
And this is the lesson that people all over the deserts should learn. You should be satisfied with small farms scattered all over, so that when you go to the desert, you do not speak of 100,000 acres project, but you speak of 100,000 projects, each of 1 acre of land with small farms.
Drought and Shifter are purely experimental scientific farms where we worked out the principles of how to do things. And we decided that before we can dare to propose our scheme to use in a large scale in developing countries, we should have something in between a scientific farm and a purely economic farm built on a practical basis.
In Wadi Mashash, using runoff principles, Dr. Evan Ari planted orchards of almonds, olives, and pistachios in large basins. Sloping gently, these are fed by channels from catchment areas in the far hills. But not all the trees were planted in basins. Some were planted in micro-catchments. The principle here is that each tree has its own small catchment of 200 square yards. The tree is planted at the lowest point in the rectangle. The catchment is kept clear of other growth, so the tree benefits from all the rain falling in its plot. These smaller catchments provide a higher ratio of water.
Microcatchments are a development which we thought we invented, a development based on our scientific research. Lately, I found out that the microcatchments were used in ancient times, apparently already by the Phoenicians in Carthago in North Africa.
In those desert areas where absorbent soil rules out runoff agriculture, cultivation is still feasible. The French have developed a pump that runs on solar power. It could make available water from the deep underground aquifers, which underlie most deserts. But is this technology appropriate?
If you want to bring through the process of development some technology to these people, you must make sure that this is the technology that the people can handle, can maintain, and can retain for a long period of time.
Alternatively, it is possible to stretch the productivity of available water. The Israelis have developed a technique called drip irrigation. Dr. Schechter.
Drip irrigation is radically different than regular irrigation because, in several ways. Perhaps the most important difference is that we do not wet the entire land surface to be irrigated.
Only that area where the roots of the plant grow is irrigated. The dripping keeps the soil constantly moist. As a result, the plant never suffers stresses which occur in drying out periods between watering in regular irrigation. The continuous dripping also washes the salt away from the roots, into the soil between the rows, so there is no salt buildup in the growing area. Fertilizer in smaller amounts can be added directly to the water. The plant grows better and gives a higher yield. Drip irrigation can be used on any type of plant. Its only technological requirement is plastic tubing and a simple system to control the water flow.
I know there's a great deal of controversy as to whether this system is feasible for developing nations. Personally, I believe it is feasible. I think it is fairly simple in maintenance. It needs a bit of training, but once people learn how to use it, they use it very well. I have seen primitive farmers in many areas of the world, including in Israel, who have learned this method. They learn it very rapidly, and they use it with great efficiency, and they get good yields from it.
In Nairobi, Kenya, in the fall of 1977, 100 nations met at a UN conference to deal with the worldwide problem of desertification.
This conference is also unique among the worldwide conferences convened by the United Nations, in that it aims to come to the rescue of some of the most underprivileged sections of humanity. If the conference succeeds in its aims, it would have ushered in a new age of humanism, which enables the conversion of the explosion of scientific and technical know-how into human welfare.
2 satellite monitoring projects, one in Southwest Asia and the other in Latin America, were set up. These will help define the extent of desertification and pinpoint undegraded natural resources. Algeria has already started planting a green belt. 5 North Saharan nations agreed to cooperate in restoring vegetation to dunes and stabilizing shifting sands. An international livestock management project was established. Nomads will continue raising herds in the Sahelian rangelands. But for fattening and marketing, the livestock would be moved down to wetter regions, reducing the pressure on the range. But it is national governments which hold the key to the success of any program. Large-scale, politically glamorous schemes, like a swan, must be avoided, for human as well as environmental reasons. Small-scale projects based on the needs and cooperation of the local population seem to work best in the long run. A few years ago, the beautiful and fertile oasis of El Bashiri in the Sudan was about to be buried under a tide of advancing sand dunes. It was the local people themselves who initiated the remedy.
The sand dune fixation scheme started when the El Bashiri people realized that their lands and their houses were being buried by these moving sand dunes. And they took the good chance of the president visiting this area, and they put their request, and the government responded. The first thing was to make a barbed wire fence all around the compound in 2 areas, one on this dune and one on the other side of the oasis. The next thing was to build what we call the dry fence made out of leptadenia branches. This is a plant which is very common in the sand dune areas, and we erect this fence along the contours. Subsequently, we also build certain portions of it across the dunes so that we create sort of small rectangles. Having made the dry fence, we started to plant trees of various species, such as mesquite and Acacia Senegal, and many other species together with grasses. You can see and compare for yourself the difference between the vegetation inside the managed area and the one which is outside, unprotected.
Local people asked for this scheme. When the government helped them get it underway, they managed it and kept grazing animals out of the protected area. At least most of the time. And the only bit of imported technology they required was barbed wire. Loss of marginal land directly affects 2/3 of the nations of the world. But it is the poorest ones which bear the brunt. 50 million people are in immediate danger of destruction of their livelihoods. They may lose control over their own lives. As a last resort, facing starvation, they will become refugees.
For a transcript, send $2 to this address. Major funding for NOVA is provided by this station and by other public television stations. Additional funding is provided by grants from Exxon Corporation and the National Science Foundation.